I'm particularly impressed with the quality of speakers and panelists brought together to this event. And I'm even more excited that we have today almost 180 participants on the call at this stage. So I would like to thank you all for making the time to join and contribute through questions or suggestions. My special thanks to the organizing committee for their selfless effort and for the amazing job of preparing for this webinar. I wish us all successful deliberation. Shamsu.
Much, Mr. Shamsu Anjurin.
Raphael, up to you.
AAIG. I would just want to check if Mr. Tefera Mekonnen has joined and if he can submit his keynote address. Otherwise, we probably would move to the first presentation by Dr. Robert Lisingi. And then when Mr. Tefera joins, we have the opportunity to submit his.
Hello, Raphael. Please allow me just to update you. We have Mr. Franklin from AFCAC who will do the interventions by on behalf of the AFCAC SG.
Okay, great. So has Franklin got a speech on behalf of SG?
Yes, Raphael and colleagues, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Franklin Omondi from AFCAC. I have a speech that I'll deliver on behalf of the Secretary General. Please accept his apologies because of a last minute change in the schedule. If you allow me, I
go ahead.
Go ahead, thank you. Like I've said before, I'll deliver the keynote address on behalf of the Secretary General. Secretary General of AFRA, Secretary General of SCI Africa, representatives of IATA Africa, representatives of OIM here present, distinguished stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It is an honor for me on behalf of the Secretary General to be at this important industry webinar titled Achieving Affordable Air Transport Across Africa, and to present this short keynote address on making Africa air transport more affordable, issues for determination. There is no doubt that the issue of affordability is one of the non-physical barriers that is hampering the sustainable development of air transport in Africa. We thank everyone involved in the organization of this well-coordinated and planned webinar, particularly those who have remained consistent in their advocacies and campaign against continuous imposition of high taxes, charges, and fees on aviation industry in Africa. High costs of operations exacerbated by taxes, high charges and fees have continued to restrain the functions and catalytic importance of civil aviation in the socio-economic development and continental integration of Africa. There is no doubt that the aviation sector is seriously overtaxed and overburdened with high charges and fees, thereby making air travel very expensive and is still a myth in most parts of Africa. Whatever the type of charges and fees, either through proliferation of interchangeability of taxes in the form of charges, monopoly of service providers, and whether all these are directly collected from the passenger or the airlines, it all adds up to the cost of travel, as the airline will ultimately pass on these charges to the passengers as cost of ticket. Apart from the aeronautical charges and government taxes, airlines also pay additional charges and fees for ancillary airport facilities and services, ground handling services, oversight and regulatory services by the CAA. Airlines are equally faced with high jet fuel costs. However, the charges and taxes levied by far have the highest impacts on prices of tickets for air travel in Africa. As we are all aware, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on air transport services in Africa, particularly passenger services. With the current cost structure of African airlines, it is increasingly becoming more difficult to survive the fierce competition and forces that are lined up against them during and post-COVID-19. Conversely, many of the carriers that compete with African airlines come from an operating environment that provides them with significantly low cost, thereby putting them at an edge over their African counterparts. Then, we need to create a cost-competitive landscape for African aviation by reducing costs across Africa and encourage multi-sectoral collaboration with other sectors such as finance, trade, hospitality, and tourism. Hence, on the part of AFCAC, we will continue to work with our stakeholders to utilize available medium to urge all concerned government institutions and relevant tax authorities to review and harmonize their various tax policies in a manner that will enable the sector achieve its importance in the socio-economic development and continental integration of Africa. In this month of March 2021, AFCAC, in collaboration with ICAO and other partners, is planning to organize 2 back-to-back virtual capacity building workshops on economic oversight and regulation for sustainable development of air transport in Africa. The main objective of the workshop is to build capacity for member states and regional economic communities on economic oversight of airports and ANSPs and compliance with ICAO's guidelines and policies on taxations, airport and ANSPs charges. This is in line with the Joint Prioritized Action Plan 2021 for the establishment and operationalization of the Single African Air Transport Market, SATA, as well as for the sustainable development of air transport in Africa. The capacity building workshops will give a general analysis of current situation in Africa, share the existing policies and manuals, and finally, it will recommend an action plan for implementation in order to address the issues of economic oversights of airports and air navigation service providers, as well as the imposition of taxes, charges, and fees on air transport in Africa. The recommendations from these workshops will form the basis of the resolution that will be submitted to the Steering Committee on Transport to process for their adoption by the African Union Heads of States Summit in line with the AU procedures. Therefore, we are happy that this webinar is taking place today, and we will be prepared to work with AAIG to ensure that the recommendations and conclusions of this webinar will form part of the recommendations that will be forwarded to the STC Transport for consideration. Distinguished participants, in order for Africa to realize the objectives of the AU Agenda 2063 and ensure sustainable development of air transport, and to realize the benefits of socio-economic development promised by air transport, all stakeholders will need to work together to reduce the cost of travel so as to make it affordable to a larger sector of the African population who are currently excluded from use of air transport because of the high fares. Finally, thank you once again. Thank you to all the partners for organizing this workshop. And on behalf of the Secretary General of AFCAC, we urge participants to actively engage in the discussions and work towards the achievement of the objectives of this webinar. On behalf of the Secretary General, again, I wish all a happy and successful event, and I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Franklin, for delivering the keynote address on behalf of the Secretary General of AFCAC. Mekonam, we really appreciate the importance AFCAC plays on aviation and the role you are playing on behalf of the continent to make transport affordable. Next on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, I would wish to invite a presentation on strategies for sustainability of African aviation industry. The Chief Energy, Infrastructure and Services Section, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Robert Lesingi.
Thank you so much, Raphael, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I'm going to talk about the sustainability of Africa's aviation industry. I will focus today on African airlines, but most of the things I would say, I guess, would be applicable to other actors in the industry as well. It's difficult to talk about this in 15 minutes, but I hope to generate a discussion which will follow after my presentation and of course after this meeting in general. Next slide, please. You would all agree with me that the notion of sustainability is gaining traction in the COVID-19 era. So we hear buzzwords, slogans like Build Back Better, Build Back Greener, Build Forward Better. This is all about sustainability. And I think that the notion of sustainability, we have implicit concepts like inclusiveness, health, well-being, quality, service delivery, resilience, and value for money. These are all concepts that are valid for the aviation industry. But generally, the UN looks at three dimensions of sustainability, namely social, economic, and environmental dimension. We don't have time to talk about all of this, so I will focus mainly on economic and social dimensions of sustainability. I think that the reason we're talking about sustainability of Africa's aviation industry in general and airlines in particular are clear. We need to maximize and safeguard the economic benefits, which are enormous in terms of job creation, support to local businesses, contribution to the GDP. Also, we need to increase connectivity and affordability of flight, especially in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area that has just entered into force this year. Next slide, please. I try to answer key questions. One, what are the current opportunities for growth of the aviation industry? Because we can't talk about sustainability without growth. What are the different dimensions of sustainability of Africa's aviation industry? What are the options for financing Africa's aviation industry? Because finance is one pillar of sustainability. What partnership strategies are available to sustain Africa's aviation industry, partnerships being another pillar? And how does the efficiency of airlines fit in the discussion of sustainability? Can we talk about sustainability without talking about the underlying challenges to the efficiency of airlines? Next, please. In terms of opportunities, I think we will all agree that the anticipated increase in air travel transport demand, particularly cargo, as a result of the African Continental Free Trade Area, is a massive opportunity air transport in Africa. We also know that air transport is part of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The protocol on trade in services includes an annex, or should include an annex on air transport. I think it's worth noting here that the traffic rights are not part of the Continental Free Trade Area, but trade in terms of services, maintenance of aircraft are part and parcel of the Continental Free Trade Area. But all in all, obviously, the Continental Free Trade Area, if it enters into full force, and if we see the kind of increase in trade that we're anticipating, this will be a huge opportunity for African airlines and the aviation industry in general. I like some studies that have been undertaken by AFCAC IATA that really put some figures in the kinds of increase in opportunities that we see from SATAM, the air transport market. Full air transport liberalization between 12 African countries would add 1.3 billion per annum to their GDP and create 155,000 new jobs. This is really, really huge. I also like this statistics which Embraer presented last or 2 years ago in Dakar in one of the meetings I attended, that 555 aircraft in the up to 150 seat category would be needed over the next 20 years for 10 of the 34 countries that signed the solemn commitment to SATAM. So these are huge opportunities. And just to end here by saying that this year we are currently undertaking a study on the implications of the continental free trade area for demand of transport infrastructure and services. And we'll be able to give some figures on how many planes, new planes, will be required as a result of the continental free trade area. Now, travel demand and sustainability. We cannot talk about sustainability without having people traveling. And here is where the impact of COVID-19 is very serious. We are experiencing a GDP drop between 1.7 to 5.4% in Africa in 2020, which is huge. Key sectors affected include agriculture, industry, and services. In fact, services affected by up to 61.2%. We all know that services include transport, air transport, tourism, hotels, and so on. We know why there's decline in travel because of travel restrictions. We know that passengers are concerned about contracting COVID-19. We know that people don't have money in their pocket to travel, and all of this has resulted in aircraft being grounded. And so if we want to see demand for travel increasing, then we need to see lifting of travel restriction. We need to see passenger confidence rising. We need to see economic growth with people having more money in their pocket to travel so that the planes will fly again. Now, the first pillar of sustainability I mentioned was finance. But what is the financing requirement? Why do airlines need money? Well, they need to pay their creditors. They need to refund the passengers who did not fly because of canceled flights. They need to pay their staff. They need to maintain their aircraft and so on and so forth. Just to put some figures, I think the IATA and ICAO have made estimates between 6 and 13 billion, but I'm not going to make any fuss about the exact amount, but these sums are really huge, and the industry partners are advocating for 10 billion to save the aviation industry in Africa. African Union Commission and AFCAP Task Force, which we're all part of, last year is advocating for 25 billion. So these are huge sums of money. Next, please. Okay, so ECA now worked with AFRA because we did believe that if we're going to mobilize resources for the sustainability of African airlines, we need to know exactly what is the indebtedness of this airline. So we did a survey for 2020 and 2021 trying to quantify the indebtedness of African airlines. And brief, we found out that for 16 airlines, the indebtedness was 3.2 billion. And we also found out that out of these 16 airlines, 3 of the airlines, which I'm not going to give names, confidentiality, had the bulk of this indebtedness. Of course, these are the huge airlines. Next, please. Very quickly, the bulk of the indebtedness is to banks and financial institutions and leasing companies. You could see 46% of the indebtedness was to banks and financial institutions and 38% to leasing companies. Next, please. Yes, while banks and leasing companies are the dominant creditors, a large share of the commitment of some airlines is to aircraft manufacturers. And this is very important. If you look at the black bars, you will see that aircraft number 4 or airlines number 4 and airlines number 6, we didn't put the names for confidentiality, as well as airlines number 12, a bulk of their indebtedness is to aircraft manufacturers. So this source of financing cannot be underestimated as well. Next slide, please. We also found out that a vast majority of airlines are more indebted to leasing companies than to other categories of creditors. You can see in red 53%, which shows that leasing as a financing option is gaining ground on the continent. And we'll see more of that in the next slide, please. Oh, no. But anyway, before I go to the next slide, where we'll talk more about leasing, we have been tracking at ECA what governments and financial institutions have been doing to try to minimize the disruptions in the liquidity of airlines, and basically see what governments are doing, mostly in terms of financing and deferrals or waivers. So in terms of financing, they are providing direct support to their companies, they are subsidizing operations, they're providing wage subsidies, loan guarantees, and equity. And I have to say that what we have in this table, which you could go back and look later, doesn't just cover Africa, it covers the industry across the world. In fact, Africa airlines have not benefited as much as the airlines in other regions of the world. Next slide, please. Yeah, I was talking about leasing.
Robert, just my way of saying that was 5 minutes to go.
Oh, okay. All right. Just to say, leasing, there's a lot of talk about leasing on the continent. The African Development Bank, Afrexim Bank, the African Finance Corporation are all talking about creating leasing platform for the continent. The question really is that the way to go? That's food for thought. Next slide, please. I spoke a lot about finance. The other pillar of sustainability is partnerships. In fact, partnerships could be a key to sustainability of Africa's airlines. We all know that COVID-19 induced low demand and liquidity crisis suggests the need for downsizing and consolidation, especially for small airlines. Could you go to the next slide, please? I just want to show you partnerships which we are already seeing on the continent, which could actually help in the sustainability of the airlines on the continent. Interlining, you have code sharing, you have alliance membership. A lot of the big airlines on the continent are members of alliance. You also have franchise, subsidiary, or joint ventures. I think Ethiopia Airlines is showing us good examples in that area. Next slide, please. I think that I would like to spend 1 minute on emerging partnership platforms which could play a big role going forward in sustainability of African airlines. One is the COVID-19 medical supplies. Vaccine distribution may provide new opportunities for airlines on the continent. I was reading somewhere that we will need over 15,000 flights worldwide to distribute vaccines. I saw vaccines being taken to Nigeria and Ghana recently, carried by Emirates. But beyond that, we have the African Medical Supply Platform, which is about sourcing, procuring, and distributing medical supplies on the continent. And I do know that a number of African airlines, including ET, South African Airways, Rwanda Air, are all partners in the medical supplies platform. I want to commend AFRA also for the capacity sharing portal, because I think that this e-commerce platform are creating new opportunities for airlines as we move forward. Next slide, please. I think it would not be good to end this presentation without talking about the implications of COVID-19 on YD, SATAM, and sustainability. I think the YD provides or COVID provide opportunity to enter into cooperation arrangements as survival strategies. And this is provided in Article 1.3 in YD. But there are other implications which may not necessarily be good as a result of COVID-19. One is the inability to comply with the YD eligibility criteria due to liquidity crisis, which we are seeing among the airlines. For instance, one of the criteria is fully owned. Aircraft should fully own or have long-term lease exceeding 6 months on an aircraft, which is a serious challenge for some airlines now. I think the other issue which speaks to sustainability is the provision of financial support to the airlines. I think YD talks about competition, a level playing field, but because of COVID-19, we're seeing that some airlines are receiving financial support from their government, and we need to discuss this in the context of sustainability. Next slide, please. I think it is hard to talk about sustainability without looking at underlying efficiency challenges of African airlines. Sustainability strategies may not work if inefficiencies are not addressed. And I will look at some of those in the next slide. So can you move to the next slide, please? Yes, I think there are three dimensions of efficiency we could group. I think one is the business characteristics of African airlines, and this speaks directly to the size, ownership, and the business models that the airlines are using. We find out that larger airlines are more efficient because of economies of scale. So if you have a lot of small airlines, I'm not sure how much partnerships or finance will help if some of these underlying issues are not addressed. We also know that the issue of ownership is directly linked to efficiency in Africa. State airlines are associated, not all, but some, with political interference, substantial losses, over politicization, labor-intensive network, bureaucratic arrangement, and so on. But I think I should mention here that a study in Europe actually found that ownership had no impact on efficiency per se. Also, the business model that our airlines are applying have some implications for efficiency. For instance, low-cost carriers, some studies have shown us, tend to be more profitable. Aircraft fleet mix is also an issue of efficiency which we need to look at. Number of aircraft families, size of aircraft. We do know that as the fleet complexity decreases, airlines operate more profitable manner. I don't think I have too much time to talk about all of this, but suffice to say that the age of our fleet also has an impact on the efficiency. Next slide, please. Okay, let me just wrap up. The other issue is the market size and network size, which has implications for efficiency next, and that will be my concluding slide. Yeah, in conclusion, and it's a shame that I didn't have enough time to expand on some of the other slides. I think we do have opportunities for sustainability in the aviation industry in Africa. One, the African Continental Free Trade Area and the Single African Air Transport Market provide huge opportunities in that regard. Two, we also have challenges, and I think that COVID-19 has tested the aviation industry to the core. And the other challenge to sustainability is addressing the underlying inefficiencies in Africa's airlines. And finally, in terms of sustainability strategies, I did mention the various business models that could be used. I also mentioned the financing option, particularly there's a question mark whether the creation of leasing companies in Africa could be the answer to sustainability. And of course, partnerships are key to sustainability. Let me stop there, and I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Robert, for a very, very, very insightful presentation. It's really good. Sorry also, my apologies for actually having to cut you short. As you would appreciate, it's just a time constraint. But thank you so much for this. Now, we would swiftly move on from Robert's presentation to the next presentation, which will be delivered by, we go to the next slide, please. The next presentation would be on financing African aviation in the new normal, challenges and opportunities. And this will be delivered by the Director and Head of Export Development at Afrexim Bank, Mrs. Oluranti Doherty. Madam, welcome, and you have the floor for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It is indeed a pleasure for Afrexim Bank to participate at the webinar and to speak to this topic that resonates with all of us, financing African aviation in the new normal, the challenges and opportunities. I will start by a brief introduction of Afrexim Bank. As we know, if you can change the slide, please. Afreximbank is a Pan-African multilateral trade finance institution. It was created in 1993 under the auspices of the African Development Bank, and our vision is to be the trade finance bank for Africa. Our mandate is to finance and promote intra and extra-African trade using three broad services: credit, that's trade, project, and asset-based financing; risk-bearing instruments, guarantees, and credit insurance, as well as the provision of trade information and advisory services. Next slide, please. So over the last decade, Afreximbank has arranged over 2.5 billion in financing to African airlines. And currently we have active pipelines in excess of over 200 million that we are working on. And we came up with a lot of interventions to support the aviation sector in view of this COVID pandemic and some of our clients or customers. This includes the Africa COVID mitigation facility called PATIMFA, which was developed by the bank, and it was accessed by a number of our clients, airline companies in the continent, to support them through this difficult period. Next slide, please. If you look at Africa's aviation sector before COVID or pre-COVID, we had a lot of challenges, and we also had a lot of opportunities. Some of the opportunities are well known to all of us. That includes the large landmass of the continent, the shortage of land transport network, increasing urbanization, good GDP growth, large population, emerging middle class. But at the same time, we had challenges in the sector. We had only one African airline that was consistently profitable. And then according to IATA in 2018, African airlines lost on average $1.09 for every passenger they carried. And when you compare that to North Africa, there was a gain or a profit of $14.66 on an average for each passenger carried. Also, the load factor was 71%, which was 10% less than the global average, which affected and partially explains the lack of profitability. And then owing to the impact of the pandemic, we expect that airlines within the region would post net loss of over 2 billion in 2020 due to decline in revenues. And then also we expect that it will cost 45% more to fly across Africa than to fly across other parts of the world in view of this pandemic. So looking at Africa's aviation sector in the immediate aftermath of COVID-19, we expect the age-long problems to persist, and some would be more pronounced. The enablers broadly remain unchanged, except for a slight decline in the GDP growth. The IMF expects North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa to recover GDP growth of 4.9% and 3% respectively in 2021, compared to global average of 5.2%. So in there's a slight dip. The cost of travel, according to Fitch Ratings, the COVID crisis will have a negative impact on air transport throughout Africa, with higher operating costs and lower utilization levels due to social distancing measures on aircrafts, which will weigh, significantly on the viability of most regional players. And then the profitability and the load factors, depending on the aircraft type, seat configuration, social distancing measures, the available seat capacity could reduce to about 33 to 50%. And this could lower the average load factors to 62%. Typically, the break-even load factor should be around 77% for airlines to achieve profitability. Also, the cost of capital, the pandemic resulted in significant changes to risk appetite, thresholds impacting availability of private capital to the sector globally. And Africa is not left out. Its fact is expected to be more stringent, with risk appetite for Africa likely to remain constrained among investors for some time. So what is the end goal? I am not just going to come here to just state the very gloomy picture to us, but where do we want to be? What do we want to have at the end of the day after this pandemic? one of the things we want to see as a financier in the aviation sector on the continent is increased and sustainable profitability for African airlines. We also want to see self-sufficiency for national carriers, strong regional connectivity and integration. Can you change the slide, please? Strong regional connectivity and integration. We also want to see increased intra-African trade. We want to see higher revenue flows from tourism, and we want to see high economic growth. With this in mind, we believe we can achieve this. If you can change to the next slide. How do we get here? Well, one, we believe there should be fleet rationalization across the airlines in the industry. We believe there should be strong management and leadership for airlines. We believe there should be improved and active partnerships and collaborations between airlines on the continent. We believe there should be effectiveness of industry groups, reassessment of business planning. We also believe there should be active and continuous investors' engagement, both with debt and equity financiers. So given historically low load factors for African airlines compared to other airlines globally, sometimes we could just deduce that maybe African airlines sometimes made wrong aircraft type choices. Getting the right sized aircraft for any route would help address the load factor issue. Also, the fleet strategy has been historically poor amongst African airlines, with airlines having too much variation in the types of aircrafts within their fleets. This also contributes to higher operating costs. Then some African airlines have also been known to be influenced by the prestige of flying certain long-haul international routes, although these routes may not be profitable. Then the strong leadership and expanding resources on good quality business planning prior to network expansion and aircraft acquisition are key requirements for the future of these airlines. We also believe that there should be increased partnership among airlines, also with non-African airlines, to facilitate and increase connectivity within the region, even beyond what we have presently. We also believe that airlines should not restrict dialogue to financiers. They should engage financiers more. When they have aircrafts on order, they should have regular dialogue with financiers with regards to their business plans. And because if these are shared in advance, it facilitates quick turnaround of their financing request when it is actually presented, because financiers have prior or advanced information on what these airlines are doing and what their priorities are. So what's the role for Afreximbank? How do we see ourselves contributing to getting African airlines and the aviation sector to become resilient and to be what we want it to be? Can you change the next slide? So one is we believe Afreximbank's role goes beyond just providing financing. Due to our nature as a multilateral trade finance institution, we believe that we would be involved, we will need to get more involved in advocacy. Air transport liberalization, visa liberalization, advocacy measures to continue to push for the adoption of the Cape Town Convention, to continue to streamline health screening, push for streamlining of health screening processes across the continent, to continue to push for increasing investment in air transport infrastructure. We've seen that liberalizing regional markets would enable key African carriers to compete on a more level playing field and will allow smaller countries to establish even more viable connections. While 34 countries representing 75% of African passenger traffic have signed up to SATEM, only 10 states, member countries, have fully implemented the SATEM measures. More advocacy are required for competition rates and with the airlines to improve on their viability and sustainability. And Afreximbank would want to partner with key stakeholders in pushing for these advocacy measures. We also want to reap, we also want to be able to reap the full
5
benefits
minutes more.
of well interconnected markets. Traffic liberalization, we believe, should go hand in hand with visa liberalization. We also believe there should be increasing upward trend in African countries liberalizing visa regimes, because as of now, African citizens still need visas to travel to 46% of other African countries. We also want to see the adoption of the Cape Town Convention, because it makes it easier for financiers to be able to, potentially do business and provide more financing to member states. We also want to see new product development among us financiers. We've had a lot of things being said about aircraft leasing platform. Is this the way to go? When would this be actually done? But we have also been contemplating something new within Afreximbank, and we have been contemplating a lease deposit guarantee. And we believe that this might be a quicker option to developing aircraft leasing platforms, where we provide guarantees to leasing companies so that they can relax their onerous leasing requirements, their onerous deposit requirements that they insist from African Airlines. And this is one thing we will be pushing ahead on full stream this year to see as a way of trying to alleviate the financing challenges that African Airlines are currently facing with regards to doing their business and being able to improve on their fleet capacity and routes capacities too. So I just want to thank you for giving us this opportunity, and to state once again that we are a committed player and partner in the aviation industry on the continent, and will continue to push across advocacy, providing direct financing through PDP debt facilities, providing new products to also meet the current needs of the industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Duhati, for such a brilliant presentation. Very much appreciated. Yes, time would not allow for you to have elaborated more, but I think your support in this regard is very much appreciated. We'll come back to you should there be any questions from the panelists and the other delegates who are watching us.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, if Robert is still on the call, I have one question. If you don't mind, in a couple of seconds, if you can answer it.
Okay.
Someone is asking, I am interested to hear how governments and other agencies are supporting airports during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll be very quick. I think I didn't mention in my presentation that a couple of ways. One is through direct finance support. I have to say that this has happened a lot more out of Africa than on the continent, but also through deferrals and waivers. I know a couple of countries on the continent that have waived taxes such as tourism tax. I think we would have loved to see more, but we have not seen. But definitely, some governments have provided direct financial support to actors in the aviation industry. Some of them have also waived or deferred a number of taxes. In terms of organizations, I think what the organizations have done, like AFCAC, ECA, AUC, was to come together and through the task force to put together the COVID-19 recovery strategy and try to quantify the financial requirement. And I think as a result, we have tried to facilitate engagement between African aviation actors and development finance institutions. I know that ECA had facilitated discussion between the airlines and Afreximbank, for instance. We are facilitating discussions between the airlines and the African Finance Corporation. So basically, this is what the institutions are doing, trying to facilitate engagement between the different actors. But for countries, yes, some of them we've not seen enough, but some have provided financial support, some have waived or deferred taxes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that response to the question. I see there are a number of questions that are coming in. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to our next segment, and our next speaker is the fireside chat. And at this point, I would want to invite my colleague, Adefunke, who would be interviewing our guest, Mr. Roger Foster, CEO, Airlink South Africa. Thank you very much, Funke. Take it from here.
Thank you, Raphael. Good day to everyone. Sorry for the croaky voice. I woke up with a bit of a frog in my throat this morning. I'm sure talking will get better. I'm going very quickly with a couple of slides. Can we see them, please? We heard already that in 2018, $0.56 was the cash burn, was the loss to African Airlines per passenger. In 2020, that increased to $4. That cash burn continues, and it will continue in 2021, this year. And we can see already Africa faring quite the highest in terms of cash burn. One of the things to note is that vaccination rollout will also contribute to the recovery of African aviation, meaning how quickly are we able to get these vaccines rolling across the continent because of the markets that we fly to outside of the continent. Next slide, please. So we've had some failures across the world in terms of airline bankruptcies and administration. Latin America being the highest, but Africa a second, with quite a number of airlines, I believe about 8 in administration. And this is as a result of the systemic problems, the long-standing issues, which were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Next slide. So this slide shows us the cost structure of African aviation. And we can see from this slide, the biggest size of the pie belongs to aircraft, fuel, and oil at 30.3%. The next slide combines several slices, but relates to flight equipment, which is the rentals, the MRO maintenance, the insurance, and other expenses. That's about 20.1%. Depreciation and amortization of these assets, and finally, user charges at 7.6%. Next slide. So we have said it, you've heard it over the years, and you've heard it today. We have, as African aviation, excessive costs in many categories. And we can see here a comparison of African aviation industry compared to the rest of the world. And by far the highest component in terms of comparison with the rest of the world is user charges. Next is all of those flight-related expenses in terms of the aircraft, the maintenance, the overhaul, the fuel and oil, and so on, as we mentioned before, as well as a few others, like operating expenses and the cost of sales and promotion. Moving on. We also have another dynamic to add here. The ecosystem itself. Where does aviation sit? Right in the middle. But everyone else seems to make more money than the airlines. And this chart shows us an example of this. We can see, the airlines at the bottom, followed by airports, ANSPs, the MROs, and towards the top, manufacturers, and so on. And we're going to be speaking to some of these players to hear their own thoughts on this issue of cost. Moving on. Finally, the impact. What does this all mean? When the cost is so high, it impacts the demand. Demand being the availability or ability of people to access aviation as a means of transportation. We've said already that living standards are low across Africa, and this is an example that it will take within Africa to travel within Africa, let's say from Nairobi to Dakar, the average person has to spend over half a month's salary to fly. And the second is To fly interregionally from Africa to any other part of the world, the average person has to spend almost 7 weeks salary, almost 2 months. Moving on. The potential rise, though, is there. We've said already about the good growth, the good prospects for aviation before the COVID, but there's still the opportunity. We can see here the number of departures per year per head of population. South Africa in Africa leading the charge, and then followed by Kenya, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. Still quite low on the chart. Last few slides before I go into the fireside chat. The connectivity picture before COVID, that's at April last year. This is what it looked like. We needed to be more connected as a continent anyway, and then COVID came along and just decimated it all. Only cargo and essential flights were moving as of April. And moving now, we had only 100 city pairs compared to 970 in April 2019. And to our last slide, we now see the impact and comparison of connectivity in our 5 key markets, South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, Ethiopia, and Algeria, looking at the disruptions over the period of time. As of October 2020, you see what the connectivity picture looks like. There's still a lot of room for improvement. And indeed, this slide is so important because the big source markets, Europe, USA, and a few in Asia, remain still closed to Africa. So without further ado, let me turn to Roger. Thank you so much for being with us, Roger. With everything you've heard so far from our development institutions, from AFCAC, from these slides that I've just shared as a scene setter, do you see an opportunity right now for African aviation ecosystem to try to practically and sincerely address the issue of high cost of aviation in Africa? And if so, what, how? What are those practical ideas that you have? Over to you.
Thank you, Funke, and thank you everybody for having me here today. It's a privilege. I don't propose to dwell on the statistics. I think I've left that to you. Nice presentation. Thank you, Funke. We all know exactly how bad things. I'm going to just focus a little bit on Southern Africa because that's a little bit more my home turf, just for now. The challenges here are not unique. They are, however, more amplified than within most other economic zones. There are many examples of countries keeping their borders shut for prolonged periods, such as Angola, Madagascar, Lesotho, and this has destroyed air access. The second wave was much more devastating than the first, in that airlines cavalierly offered inventory to the market, which became flooded with capacity, whilst the South African variant, 501 Yankee Victor 2, for those that understand phonetics, gained traction. This became stigmatized as being far more infectious and more dangerous and caused the travel embargoes to and from Southern Africa. And consequently, many of the world's most influential airlines, such as EK, for example, suspended their services. The net effect was that international travelers from the multiplicity of source markets were absent from feeding into the local markets, which were diminished by fears of the contagion and oversupplied by overzealous airlines. The situation has become unsustainable. And please bear with me, I'm just sketching the landscape. As regards the opportunity to address costs across the ecosystem, until now, I have only witnessed the converse, I'm afraid to say. Let's start with fuel. A year ago, at the beginning of the global pandemic, crude traded at about $60 per barrel. During the hiatus of the first wave of the pandemic, it traded at around $20 per barrel, a third of its normal price, due to the diminished global demand and oversupply of oil. And now it's trading around $64 per barrel, despite the poor demand. Fuel, which represents the single biggest input cost, isn't helping. I haven't seen a single airport or air navigation service provider or aeronautical authority show any willingness to work together with the airlines to reduce input costs. I have seen service providers, such as ground handlers, introduce a COVID premium Have you ever? Because of their higher direct input costs resulting from risk mitigation protocols such as social distancing. And I have seen infrastructure service providers introduce cost-cutting measures such as headcount reductions that have compromised airport operating hours that have in turn caused wholesale schedule changes without notice, disrupting travel itineraries and angering customers. And then on the revenue side, one common thread seems to be that customers are not always able to procure PCR tests in time for their booked flights, with the result that they are unable to fly as planned. And because the cause is COVID, the airline holds the ticket open and loses out on the revenue. The case for a post-COVID flourishing Africa passenger market is compelling, on paper at any rate. The pandemic and accompanying crisis have not slowed down population expansion or urbanization on the continent. And if the United Nations data is to be believed, we are still on track to add the equivalent of China's total current populace to Africa over the next 20 years. All of these people need to be fed, housed, educated, given care, and above all, jobs and economic opportunities in an affordable and sustainable fashion. It is a mammoth imperative for every African government, especially those that rely on an electorate to appoint them. The obvious solution to do this is to promote the establishment and development of enterprises and open and free up markets for trade, transport, and travel. A safe, reliable, well-organized, and competitive air transportation industry would play a central role in this. It should drive efficiencies, it should contain costs, and above all, provide affordable services to connect markets. This segues neatly to the single African air transportation market, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and the accompanying free movement of people protocol. Forgive me if I sound a little jaded or cynical about these. We've been talking about YD and market liberalization in 3 decades, and I have the scars and the t-shirts to show for Airlinks and our industry's attempts to test various governments' appetites for it. What have we learned in the process? Protectionism is the natural default position. It's not unique to this continent. Just have a look at Trump's America, Brazil, and the UK's own BBBEE or Brexit, Boris's Britain exit Europe. More often than not, all of the solemn declarations, the honest commitments and best intentions are thwarted by thickets of red tape, riptides of inconsistent policies and contradictory regulations administered in swamps of heavy-handed bureaucracy, setting expensive compliance hurdles, all of which seem designated to impede, corrupt, or obstruct at least businesses, trade, and tourism, instead of enabling and encouraging them. Of course, it is within the powers of those governments to take an industrial-grade weed eater and clear the overgrown path. Some countries representing smaller markets and economies enthusiastically embrace liberalization, but none of the big powerhouse countries seem willing to blink first and take the plunge. If we are absolutely brutal about it, why should they? And if you were in their boots, would you? The African Union is not a legislative equivalent of the European Commission. It has no legislative or judicial powers.
5 minutes to go.
It is a club of nations that happen to exist on the same continent. They may be like-minded on some issues, but they have different and competing ambitions, ideologies, economies, capacities, systems, policies, and strategies. Why should its members surrender their sovereign rights to do something that is unable to provide them with any security in return? In the Afrocontinental Free Trade Area and the SATM, if these offer such potential, why is it proving to be so difficult getting everybody on board? So far, only 34 of the 55 African countries have ratified the Free Trade Area Agreement, and the same number have signed the solemn SATM commitment, but only 18 of those have signed the implementation memorandum. Funke, I'm going to stop at that just for now, because I'm sure you've got some other more pertinent questions, and I might come back to this a little bit later. But if I can, just before handing over to you, say now is the time for governments to let businesses be free to deliver the efficiencies that their economies will prosper from. I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Roger. I mean, you've given us a very comprehensive list of issues that the airlines face across that ecosystem. And given that the ecosystem is there and we'll be talking to them next, we'll hear from them in a minute. You've also spoken to the challenges with SATA mainly being protectionism and all of the other ills that hide under that umbrella. And we'll also be speaking to that shortly. The one question I wanted to ask you, Roger, is from an airline perspective, what are the airlines doing? Do you believe that there is enough cooperation, collaboration, and how can we drive that forward? And also, what would you like to see from your associations? We have IATA here, we have AFRA here, we have ASA here. What would you like to see us do more of on your behalf?
Funke, the options available to airlines to bring down costs. Airlines can only implore all elements of their value chain to come to the party and be reasonable with their expectations. Some service providers seem disinterested, such as airports, fuel suppliers, and therefore airlines are left to exploring other cost-saving aspects that are more within their remit, such as staff pay cuts, debt restructuring, and lease rental realignment with market, often translated into reduced rates or power by the hour. What should governments be doing? As things stand, the exercise of market enticement or excitement is left entirely in the hands of the airlines. In free market, highly contested environments, such as the South African home market, the bloodbath has forced fares to their lowest levels in decades or in history, with airlines bearing the full brunt of the under-recovery. Airports and government taxes have not surrendered any of their ordinary takeout. What should other players in the aviation value chain be doing? OEMs, airports, ground handlers, etc. OEMs are providing support by waiving minimum utilization undertakings and extending credit terms, but they need to do more in the way of making product support more accessible and more affordable. Is there a common ground? The common thread is that airline operating economics are at their greatest imbalance. The revenues predicated by the market are inadequate to cover operating costs. The market is likely to remain grossly diminished and overtraded for the foreseeable future. Therefore, operating costs have to yield. They have to come down, and airlines can only influence those that are within their remit, as for example, the operating economics, the cost of staff. But from there on, unless governments and all other stakeholders come together and find ways in which to operate direct variable operating costs together with the other stakeholders like the lessors and the financiers. Those are already at the party. They're at the table doing what they can. But unless governments do this, we're not going to have an industry in the future.
Thank you very much, Roger. You've given us a lot of food for thought, and we're going to segue now straight into the panel discussion because they have heard from you as a CEO, as someone who is in the trenches every day, and you've shared with us the challenges that you face and a cry for help really to the industry, the ecosystem, to say, this is how we'd like you to support us. So we're now going to hear from the same ecosystem. Let's switch over now to our panel session. If we can have the slide that shows who's participating. We thank you very much, Roger. Please stay with us because we're probably going to have some discussions moving forward. Before I do, let me just quickly check if there is any questions for you specifically, Roger. Hold on a second.
There are no questions.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's keep it moving. We'll remind participants if they have specific questions, they can. But I think this conversation is just really showing the two sides of the coin. We're hearing from the practitioner, and now we want to hear from those people surrounded. So here we go. Go ahead, Rafael.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Roger, for very honest and candid views on the industry there. Thank you so much. We appreciate your support and your contribution and participation at this forum. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have for the next session, which is our ultimate session, Captain Gilbert Kibe, who is the Director General, Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, Mr. Andrew Peseli, who is Regional Director, International Strategy and Business Development at Boeing. We have Mr. Ali Tonsi, Secretary General, ACI Africa, and we have our very own Ms. Bonnie Dibati, Director, African Affairs at Kanzo, and Mr. Abdul Rahman Bete, Secretary General of AFRA, and Funke will continue to host this program. She is Regional Director, Advocacy and Strategy Relations at IATA. Thank you very much, Funke. Carry it on. We have 45 minutes for this session. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Raphael. Normal protocol would dictate we start with our government official, but he's kindly allowed me to come to him last because we'd like to really hear from him. So I'm going to start with AFRA SG. Mr. Abdurrahman, would like to hear from you. You heard from one of our members, a very candid, very comprehensive list of issues that they face on a day-to-day basis. And as the industry associations, what can we do? First of all, can we speak very briefly to those issues that he has identified or articulated? And can you also speak to what the industry is doing? You might want to talk about AFRA specifically, but generally, what is the industry doing to support airlines? 2 points that I want you to bear in mind that Mr. Foster said. One, this is not a sustainable situation for African airlines. And two, that they are having to do everything internally, looking inward to support themselves. That seems to be that a suggestion there that they're not getting much support from the industry. I also want to start by leaving you with two statistics. One is that over the pandemic, African Airlines, some African airlines received support of about $2.6 billion from their governments or from institutions. And we, by our own analysis, based on our advocacy and engagements with aviation suppliers, there was a cost saving of about $100 and something million in taxes and user charges across the entire continent, which is a drop in the ocean. So please, over to you, SG.
Thank you, Funke. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I would like to be very brief because of time constraints. I talk about the situation even before the pandemic and the current situation during the pandemic. I think that at policy level, governments need to implement the flagship project launched by the African Union Commission, because these projects are very, very important to improve air traffic in Africa. I'm talking about the SATAM, the Continental Free Trade Area, and the Free Movement Protocol, to impulse air traffic growth on the continent. Government should create, in fact, a conducive environment and a favorable regulatory environment to support sustainable air transport development. At operational level, government need to include systematic users consultation in their decision-making process to take care about the cost, charges, taxes, and so on and so forth. And also at industry level, we really need to better manage the cost. We need also a collaborative approach in solving the challenges, the various challenges our industry is facing. The common ground for all our industry is obviously to achieve sustainability and growth of the air transport sector. Now, due to the COVID-19 situation, for me today we have three key issues. The first issue is mobilizing funds for airlines and the aviation sector at large. We all participated to the African Union Commission high-level task force. Some recommendations were taken. We need to fast-track the implementation of these recommendations. And AFRA is engaged with ECA to see how we can find solutions to these financing issues with financial institutions. The second key issue is the new normal and the travel restrictions. According to WHO, Africa CDC, it will take 2 to 3 years to vaccinate up to 60% of African population to reach the herd immunity. Some regions are already discussing plans to introduce a vaccine pass that will allow people to bypass the current travel restrictions. We do not want any decision to link vaccination to the freedom of movement for African travelers, as the vaccination rate on the continent is low and will stay very low for coming year. AFRA is defending this position as member of African Union Commission and AACDC multi-sectoral task force on the reopening of borders. The last key issue is the drop of the intra-African connectivity by 78.9% in January 2021, year on year, due to the impact of the COVID-19. We need more cooperation between airlines to fill the gaps. Under the Route Network and Cargo Committee, AFRA is developing a connectivity portal, which will be a tool to stimulate airlines cooperation through interlining and cost sharing. Thank you. Up to you.
Thank you very much, SG. That's very interesting to note, and all of these initiatives, I'm sure we'll be hearing more about them in collaboration with other industry players. Let me now move to some of our prominent service providers, the airports and the ANSP Council. Now, Ali and my sister Bonnie, you heard Roger say something very important. He said that they didn't really receive much support from these players in the ecosystem, but rather some of them were actually increasing charges. It may not have been you specifically, but the sentiment is that the support could have been a lot stronger, especially throughout the pandemic. And with what I mentioned before, only $111 million in avoidance or deferrals or waivers or savings. What do you have to share on this issue, and how can you as the players commit to supporting the airlines in practical terms? Over to you. Let's start first with Bonnie and then we move to Ali. Let's be mindful of time, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Funke. We really heard the cry from Roger, and it is a genuine one. But what Kenzo does, we really advocate for best practice in air traffic management provision. We ensure that our members are providing an efficient service, which ensures that the costs are lower than they would have happened. We also, lobby the regulators. We lobby ICAO just to make sure that whatever recommended practices that ICAO put in place are supportive to cutting costs. And we have so many programs that we are running where we are ensuring that best practices in air traffic management are in place so that, again, we ensure that the services that our members or ANSPs are providing are as efficient. In terms of government, what we would recommend, what government should do is that the policies and the regulations implemented by government need to address and embrace changes in the ATM industry. I think, again, I heard a lot of that from Roger. We also need need commitment from government, which will ensure or support the technical innovation which comes from, which is initiated by the air traffic management industry. We also need to collaborate a lot. This is not only between ANSPs, but it's also in the whole industry. ACI collaborates with ANSPs, with IATA. We encourage that, because if we do that, the cutting of costs, the investments that we're making as ANSPs is going to assist airlines. And then finally, as far as that is concerned, we recommend that the regulations and policies which have been implemented should enable development in the industry. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Funky. In fact, just to not repeat what is said by Bonnie and other colleagues, in fact, looking at the situation of air transport industry in Africa, we observe that airports, airlines, air navigation service provider, and almost all actors in the air transport chain are managed directly or indirectly by governments. Also, pricing policies, charges, and taxes are also set by governments. So it's clear that the changes can only come from government through political and institutional decisions. In Africa, there must be, above all, a political will to bring the changes, thus allowing the liberalization of the air transport sector, the opening of the African skies, and the reduction of travel costs at the regional and international levels. For now, no players in the aviation value chain can have the control over the state's policies. But I think the African Union should play an even more important pivotal role by inviting African states to engage in initiatives such as the SATAM, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and the Free Movement of Person Protocol, and ensuring that the commitment of the various African states are materialized. At our levels, a player in the aviation value chain, starting by civil aviation, airlines, airports, etc., should make the necessary effort to induce efficiency in their activities, reduce operating costs, and perceive justifiable taxes and user charges in compliance with, firstly, the ICAO policies on taxation in the field of international air transport, the DOC 8632, and secondly, the ICAO policy on user charges, the DOC 9082. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. I'd like you to please tell me and the participants one initiative that ACI did to save costs. One, to save costs for the airlines. And Bonnie, I'm coming back to you as well with that question before I move to the aircraft manufacturer. One initiative during this 2020 pandemic period. Thank you.
In fact, in this challenging time for our airports industry, we are where the finance of all aviation stakeholders and distinctly has been decimated by COVID-19. Now, the time is to resumption of activity and the recovery of aviation industry. For the first step now is to put air transport system back in place by helping airlines, airports, and other players in the air transport chain to resume their activities normally in a safe and secure manner. Also, it's necessary to restore the confidence of the passenger in air travel while guaranteeing the respect of the sanitary procedure and the new normal. ACI Africa will continue to assist airports in the restart and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic through its airport health accreditation program. And you know, most of this program is financed by ACI funds. It's free of charges for most airports, and it helps our members to resume their activity. For your information, to date, 48 airports on the continent have already been accredited. ACI Africa will also continue to support African airports through the African Airports Development Program in raising the level of safety and security and achieve efficiency and resilience in airport operation, whilst also focusing on capacity building and forming African airport experts. And most of these activities are financed and supported by ACI Africa funds. So this is one of many activities that we made for our members to strengthen them and to support the whole system of aviation in Africa.
Thank you, Ali. I mean, I know that the ACI and the airports group did offer a lot of waivers during the COVID-19. I can testify to that. And we've heard from you to support the airport community. I think one recommendation that I can make, I'm sure the airlines would say the same thing, is that as the airline industry restarts, that discounts are given to the airlines. So while you support your membership, it's important that the people who use your terminals for whom it's built, the airlines and their passengers and cargo, that maybe some discounts are given. So let's consider this for ACI. Bonnie, over to you. One specific example of how you supported the airline industry in terms of cost saving or avoidance during the crisis, and what else you're doing. Thank you. Very quickly, please.
Thank you very much, Funke. What we have done would look like it's several projects, but it's actually one which is interlinked. We started at a global level. We started by developing a guide which assists our members with the recovery from the pandemic. And then from there in Africa, we then implemented the Kenzo Mombasa ATF roadmap, which assists airlines, because that's what you're mainly interested in, to operate efficiently. In that program, we are ensuring that they are given the correct flight levels. Lots of fuel saving. We obviously at the moment we have not started, saying exactly how much fuel saving is there. But the Kenzo Mombasa ATFM roadmap is working on that. I think because of the time, maybe I should just.
Okay. All right. So developing new, more efficient routes, I think would help to support the airlines, especially with that fuel saving, because it's a huge cost, as we've seen already. Let's move on quickly to Andrew. Being conscious of time, I know we don't have much because we're ending with Captain Kibe, but Andrew, I want to focus specifically on, this aircraft asset as another huge chunk of the cost to African Airlines, which we've seen already and we've heard about. And specifically, we heard from the development institutions some of the issues around the potential for acquisition and leasing of these aircraft. What is Boeing doing? So what did Boeing do to support the industry during the pandemic? And what other solutions do you have available on the table that you could share? And also maybe other products that may not necessarily be Boeing, but belong to the wider aircraft manufacturers group. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, just thanks for inviting Boeing to this discussion, and thanks to the AAIG for hosting this great conversation on a really important topic. Boeing is really committed to helping all its stakeholders during this pandemic. And if you're looking for sort of one area where we're trying to have immediate benefits on costs, which is really the focus of this conversation. Right now during COVID, when flight missions are changing for our airlines, and as route distances and load factors change, we're working with our customers to look at whether it makes sense to adjust maximum takeoff weight certifications, to reduce landing fees and navigation fees, because many of these navigation and landing fees that we've been talking about in this seminar are based on weight. and if weights are changing due to routes and distances and load factors, then it makes sense to negotiate with those service providers and with OEMs to have the MTOs modified. But of course, Boeing's interested in helping stakeholders achieve operational efficiencies across the profit equation. But again, we're focusing on cost, and two of the biggest affordability issues we're trying to tackle are really fuel cost and maintenance cost. And there's a lot of ways we're trying to tackle these issues. Some involve engineering, others involve technology. For example, each generation of new airplanes is 15 to 25% more fuel efficient. And these improvements come from engineering advances that we work to develop, like new engines, lighter weight carbon composite airframes, and aerodynamic innovations like natural laminar flow that reduces drag. And on the technology front, computer systems like Boeing's airplane health management system on the 787, for example, communicates with your maintenance depot when parts need to be repaired or replaced, because deferred maintenance and repairs are very expensive and failures are even more costly. And this kind of technology that we're trying to roll out and make more affordable also reduces flight cancellations and lost revenue. So these are the kind of ways that we're using technology and engineering to really help improve fuel and maintenance costs, which are two of the biggest components in the operational cost structure for our customers.
Okay, that sounds important, especially since we've seen that is really a big chunk of the pie. I think that these conversations need to continue, in particular regarding the issue of right sizing. We heard from the financiers that they see this as a critical area of concern, to ensure that the right advice and support is being provided to the airlines on a case-by-case basis. I'm going to come back to you shortly, Andrew, but I want to come now to Captain Kibe. He's the Director General of the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, a great supporter of the industry and very experienced. Captain, everyone has left it at your door. You heard all the participants say government. The supplier said government. The airlines, government. Even the industry have said we need to cooperate with government. So Captain, in terms of the big issues, the policy underpinnings of aviation that affect the issue of cost and affordability of airlines, what say you? Captain, are you with us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yes, we can. Over to you.
Sorry, I was on mute, so thank you very much. Government is what I've been hearing, and it looks like we're taking the flak for a lot of the problems that are being faced by African aviation today. But indeed, to a great extent, that is true. All the presentations have spoken about the high costs of air transport. Ticket prices are high. Why? Because charges to aviation are high. Fuel, single highest component. Then we've got other taxes that come in: passenger service charge, safety fees, security fees, landing fees, parking, air navigation. All those fees that come together do combine towards increasing But before I get to any more details, I was excited to hear about that first presentation we had. No, there was one by ECA. We're talking about the full air transport liberalization between only 12 states. Will have an additional $1.3 billion added to the GDP, 155,000 new jobs. I found that was the most exciting news that I've heard this year. 555 aircraft will be needed of up to the 150-seater category over the next 10 years if we engage in full liberalization of air transport. So I think, I like what Roger of Airlink said. We need a multi-sector discussion. government, we as government need to speak to you, the airline. We need to speak to AFRA. We need to speak to IATA, ACI, CANZO. All of us need to get together to discuss these costs that are being experienced that will add to the cost of the ticket price. And I think it's easier said than done. So I would propose that we start on a national basis. Each state get together in those components. In Kenya, we have a program known as the Civil Aviation Master Plan that we want to create. In this master plan, we're going to have a new policy that will govern aviation. What I will be pushing for is for the full liberalization of air transport in Africa, even starting with Kenya. That's what I'd like to push for. But then what does this full liberalization mean? How will it be achieved? I need to talk to you, Funke, in IATA. I need to talk to Ali in ACI and your local representatives. We need to sit down and break down the cost of a ticket. If a ticket is $100, how much of that is government taxes? If you are telling me it's $60, show me how is it $60? What is it that we're charging that comes to $60? So if we're able to identify these individual items together, we will agree on how we can reduce those costs and preferably come to maybe one single charge that would be charged to a ticket that would encompass all those aspects. Because if we reduce those taxes and charges, and the airlines also manage the cost of operation, people like Boeing come up with more fuel, and the engine manufacturers come up with more fuel efficient designs, more affordable MRO on aircraft, airports, and the others. We all agree this is what we can bring the cost down to that would be reasonable. And if we do that, the ticket that cost me $800 to go and see Secretary General of AFRA in Dakar could come down to $200, then we're in business. So I think that is the conversation we need to do. The single largest problem is the cost of air transport. So if we can resolve that, then everything else will flow so that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, the SATAM, and their implementation thereof will become a reality. So unless and until we address those items, I see challenges going forward, but I have a hope and there's a future. Thank you, Funke.
Thank you very much, Captain. I think this is an excellent practical approach in terms of what can happen in 2021. Obviously, I see this multi-sector collaboration being coordinated at the institutional level through maybe AFCAC and the African Union, supported by UNECA and the development institutions. It's important that we have this conversation. I just fear though, Captain, and just staying with you a bit, that a lot of our initiatives in Africa, you know, we have a lot of the regulations and policies in place already. Enforcement seems to be the biggest challenge. And we heard Roger mention that the AU doesn't have the same enforcement mechanisms as perhaps the European Commission. And that seems to be a real challenge. Even the ICAO policies that speak to, you know, the issue of not having excessive taxes and charges on international aviation, they're not necessarily being adhered to by the states. So how do we address this challenge? How do we ensure that the states themselves actually behave, I guess, for lack of a better word? And also, how do we ensure that we can harmonize all of these issues at institutional level? We have the African Civil Aviation Policy, we have, you know, the SATAM regulations, we have YD, we have AFCA. There's so much going on. How do we harmonize? Thank you.
Thank you. That is a very, very interesting question. So all these initiatives, they have all the legal, economic frameworks that are required to work. We need to tweak our focus to be on the supply and the demand side of air transport. So as we open up more markets, we liberalize more, we will remove the trade barriers that we have been experiencing, reduce the cost of aviation. Now, we all know that aviation is the single largest enabler of economic development anywhere. Outside of the agricultural, industrial regime and IT regime, now we are in air transport, single largest enabler of economic development. So we need to concentrate on how are we going to facilitate the growth and development of air transport. So now, like Roger was saying, you find that one party can liberalize in the air transport, but then you can't fly to the other state where you want to because they're still closed. And he mentioned protectionism. I agree with him. There's a lot of protectionism that is happening around Africa for reasons that I have only just begun to understand. And Funke and ladies and gentlemen, the primary problem we have in Africa, and that is stopping implementation of Africa Continental Free Trade Area and SATA, is I can call it maybe the fear of the unknown. If we liberalize our air transport, it means that basically Africa will become domestic and no longer international. But then the thing is, how will I protect my airline? I have an airline, but I have a stronger neighbor. They're going to come and run me over if they can come and operate in a liberalized environment in my country. But then I'm surprised that I'm not hearing much from countries that don't have airlines. I would imagine that they would be really have open arms to liberalization. But if you hear it's only about 10 countries of the 54 that have fully liberalized, it means that there's a problem. And what the primary problem is, we have not understood the benefits of SATAM. We've not understood the benefits of Pan-African trade properly or clearly enough. So it is incumbent upon you and I and all of us in the industry to come and sensitize our government, sensitize the people or the institutions that are resisting this growth, sensitize even the finance institutions and banks that we don't have to be a profitable airline, but we do need to be able to pay our bills. We do need to be able to pay the loan that you're going to give us or to afford the lease rate that you're going to do. Even if we're not making money, we should at least cover our costs and pay our people. So the primary focus should be, let's sensitize each other on the benefits of SATAM and Africa Continental Trade Area as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Captain. You've given us some really good recommendations here. The one is lowering taxes and charges. That will just go directly to the bottom line for the airlines, and that's a real practical solution. And we've also seen from the chats that the participants agree with you. They really like this idea, and they're also urging AFCAC and the AU to help coordinate the issue of liberalization. Excellent point about sensitization. We need more knowledge. We need people to be more aware of the benefits. And there is some work being done on that with the AU, AFCAC, and some of the industry players. So we'll come back to you. Raphael, how much time do we have? I want to take, one final recommendation, one quick win for 2021 from each of the participants, and then maybe go back to Roger to just quickly.
Six minutes.
Okay, perfect.
6 minutes more.
So in 30 seconds each, I would like each of you to speak to one thing that you're going to do in addition to what we've heard in 2021, a quick win for lowering costs in Africa for the airlines and for the industry. One thing in 30 seconds each. And then we'll go to Roger. Since he's been listening to the conversation, he started out with laying out his issues and you have spoken to them. And now I'd like to hear from him as a wrap up if on some of those issues, if he's heard things that will help his business, and if you'd also like to speak to specific things. All right, over to you. So I'll end with Captain again. Let's start with SG Afra.
Thank you, Funke. It's not easy to select only one. The one who is coming in my mind is regarding cooperation. We need to enhance cooperation. A quick win for us at AFRA will be to launch this connectivity portal. I talked about it. The timeline for us is to launch it officially next June. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ali.
Yes, thank you, Funke. In fact, just in a very short term, in fact, we need to open our eyes on the true benefit of the SATM and fully embrace its initiative with the view to giving a new impetus on the air transport industry and its liberalization in Africa. This is in turn will help lower down the operational cost of the industry and guarantee a fair and reasonable passenger fare regionally and internationally. But above all this, it's very important that we start by setting the right example in-house. What I mean by this is that all actors of our group, the AAIG, that's airlines, airport, air navigation, and aircraft manufacturer must establish a relationship of trust among ourselves toward addressing the burning issue of affecting our industry. In fact, we are all in this together, and it's together that we will be able to overcome the hurdles facing our industry. We need to speak on one voice, but it's more resonating and impactful in the ear of government and other institutions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Bonnie?
Thank you very much, Funke. What Kenzo is going to do, we are going to continue to collaborate with the other industry players, as I have indicated, through our Kenzo Mombasa roadmap, and we will also ensure that we lobby government to ensure that they especially separate regulation and service provision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Andrew?
Yeah, so if we're talking about really cutting costs and finding ways to have a quick win in 2021 that'll make a realistic impact, then we're really talking about working with OEMs to identify operational efficiencies and ways to cut costs. And so my advice would be, don't ignore low-hanging fruit. I mean, washing engines and washing aircraft reduces drag and fuel burn in terms of both aerodynamics and engine operations up to 1.2% on a fuel savings basis. So again, this low-hanging fruit is out there for the taking. Take concrete steps to help airlines identify these tactics through operational efficiency assessments. Again, Boeing and other OEMs have lots of information and knowledge on a wide range of subjects, and we want to be a partner to our stakeholders. And I think we're not alone. This webinar really makes it clear that there are a lot of people who want airlines to succeed. But to be a good partner, we really need our stakeholders to tell us where they need help. And we're certainly ready to listen.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Captain, last but not least, and now you can speak as the DG of the Civil Aviation of Kenya.
Yeah. So everybody has hit the point. Everybody has understood what we need to do. We need to talk. We need to collaborate. Like Bonnie is saying, we need to get together on what are the key cost drivers and how we're going to bring them down. When we've agreed on a national basis, now we go around on a regional basis. We go around to all of Africa. We go to AFCAC. We organize meetings around Africa to sensitize those states that have not yet bought into the liberalization of our airspace or SATM concept. Buy into it. It's a marketing campaign that we need to do to show the benefits. And a good example I like to give is, Funke, I want to come and visit you in Lagos. Today, it costs me $600 to get a ticket from Nairobi to Lagos. If that ticket would come down to $200, I'd be able to bring my wife with me. We all want to see, we hear of Nigerians. Who are these guys? Let's visit them. Let's see where they live. How do they live? What do they eat? I'll be able to come for a weekend, visit you, we'll speak our business, then we'll go on some tourism visits in the afternoon, eat the local food, talk to the local people, and I'll be able to get 2 tickets plus all the accommodation and transfers inside Lagos, all covered within the $600 that I'd have paid for a single ticket. That to me is the key of how we're going to start moving around among ourselves in Africa. We'll start visiting each other. Then we'll start trading. My wife will probably find something nice that she'll buy in Lagos and then maybe come and sell it here in Nairobi. And then, hey, there's a business opportunity. Nigeria has these products that are really cool that Kenyans want to buy. So we can start Pan-Africa trade. And then you, when you come and visit, there's something that you'd want to buy from here to go and sell in Nigeria. Here we're talking about Pan-Africa trade beginning, and it only starts from a visit, a leisure travel. So leisure travel is very key to the rebirth and the growth of aviation. And then we need to really, really support Pan-Africa trade. That is how we're going to build each other in Africa. I thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very good way of bringing to life what all of this we're talking about means. Roger, if you're still with us, we'd just like to get a rejoinder from you, what you've heard so far, how that will help your business, and any other further suggestions you have for the ecosystem.
Funke, I'm hearing lots of things, and I'm going to try and consolidate them into just a few thoughts. Otherwise, I'm going to get carried away. And we don't want that because a lot of people have got other things to do. What I'm hearing is that air access is key to economic development throughout Africa. And whether it's for leisure or for business purposes, air access is absent. When you hear about people having to travel through Paris to get from one point in Africa that is just literally a few hundred nautical miles away from another point in Africa, but the only way to get there is through Paris, that's just literally absurd. And there are impediments to the development of air transportation systems through Africa. We've spoken about a lot of things about cost-saving devices, and yes, we can do compressor washers on our aircraft and help a little bit of fuel, but I mean, we're talking about much bigger issues than that. Yes, we do need to pick on the low-hanging fruit. Saturn, and that is an impediment to the development of air access systems throughout Africa. What do we do about it? There are 55 states, members of the African Union. Each has its own civil aviation regulations and technical standards. They each have their own aeronautical authority. They each have civil aviation acts and competitions legislation. And invariably, they also have a flag carrier, which is a state-owned enterprise. Navigation services, and they are the regulator. In many states throughout Africa, flag carrier is protected, and in most instances enjoys a monopoly in multiple ways. This places barriers to free trade on a fair and equal basis. There are solutions to this complex constraint to the development of a free market air transportation system within Africa. Firstly, we need either a single or common system of civil aviation regulations and technical standards, and a civil aviation as well as antitrust legislation. I'm saying there needs to be a single or common. And aligned with this, every monopoly has to be broken down such that we have a true, fair, and level environment that can be accessed equally by all prospective 100 airlines. And although Africa is a large continent with over 1 billion inhabitants, this number of airlines is unsustainable. There needs to be rationalization and consolidation such that the free market forces will enable the development of powerful airline groupings based on scale and efficiency that are sustainable. Thank you, Funke.
Thank you very much, Roger. These are excellent points. I know that we're taking note of every single one of them, and we're going to be working on this in terms of a development and an implementation plan. I just want to remind all of the participants that your questions are being seen by the panelists, and they will respond to them directly, even though we can't take them here because of time. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Roger, for being with us, for being as candid as usual. It's very important for us to be able to move things forward. Thank you to our panelists for being as practical as possible, for the good suggestions which we're going to take on board. And now I'll hand over back to our moderator, Raphael. Thank you all very much.
Great stuff. Thank you, Funke, and thank you to your panelists for a great job done. At this point, I want to now draw to our last agenda item quickly so that we can wrap up. The last is the presentation of our communique, and this will be done by Chris Zwagenthal, CEO, Airlines Association of Southern Africa. So Chris, you're ready, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. I'll do a quick wrap up and then also the presentation of the communique. I think this has been an extremely valuable webinar where we really got down to the nuts and bolts of the problems that we're facing in Africa to try and make this a sustainable situation. We had Shamsu talk about the fact that only 90% of people are excluded from being able to fly in around Africa due to unaffordability. And this was highlighted as well and enforced by Franklin Amondi on behalf of the SG of AFCAC about affordability being actually a hindrance to growth and development of the aviation sector in Africa. Mr. Robert Lesengi also talked about the sustainability and highlighted opportunities that are there from the African Continental Free Trade Area as well as SATM if it's implemented properly. And we heard a lot from our speakers later on in the discussion. It's important to try and we have to work on affordable finance and getting affordable finance to be able to ensure that we use the opportunities and deal with the challenges of sustainability, which need to be done through implementation of sustainable strategies. Mrs. Doherty from Afrexim Bank really dealt with the whole issue of how that Afrexim Bank is actually, Afrexim Bank is actually dealing with the financing of airlines and gave an indication of the additional advocacy making financing and providing additional products to assist the African airline industry to become more sustainable. In respect of the discussion with Roger Foster, CEO of Airlink, I think we really got a candid view from a very honest and open airline CEO of the challenges being faced, particularly as a result of COVID-19 and how we actually get out of COVID-19, reduce demand, increase capacity, and we're not able to actually reduce costs. In fact, he noted increasing costs, particularly in respect of fuel and some premiums put on by certain service providers to ensure that they cover their costs, problems such as PCR tests, etc. But he also, I think, made an incredible indictment on us as African aviators by talking about the fact that we're not getting the job done, particularly in respect of SATM and African Continental Free Trade Area, which has come a journey of over 30 years and hindered quite a lot by red tape and bureaucracy and obstruction of business, and obstructing business and not enabling development. From the panel discussion that we had, it's clear that all these stakeholders are trying to put measures in place to assist the aviation industry to try and reduce costs, putting various mechanisms within that. That's in the African Airlines Association, CANZO, ACI, and are trying to put measures in place to assist improving efficiencies and reduce costs. From Andrew, the same aspect from Boeing's side and the support and assisting and working with stakeholders to reduce these huge costs of aircraft costs. I think Captain Kibe also made a very important contribution in terms of the recommendations for states to understand where the costs actually are so that he talked about a continental, but I think say growing it down to a state intervention to break down the cost of a ticket and find out exactly where the high cost issues are and how that we can actually reduce those, get cost reductions in that area. He talked about the wins for 2021, and I think everybody were united from the panel to talk about working together, assisting each other, and talking around a table, which I think is absolutely imperative. Roger then just closed off, I think, with some further honest discussions about the need for us to, as African Union, to actually find a common cause here, because at the moment we are actually sitting with 54 independent states, all with their own independent regulations, CAAs, competition regulations, etc. And this is effectively becoming a barrier to actually opening up the continent. And we need to find ways to rationalize and consolidate airlines to get powerful blocks, which I would assume that talks to actually being able to compete on the bigger global stage. So Rafael and then to colleagues, then I have the pleasure of launching the communique, which is here, and it'll be circulated by the various AAIG representative organizations after this webinar. And it highlights the main topic of the webinar, deliberating on the practical solutions for reducing the high cost of air transport and achieving affordable air transport. From a high operational cost perspective, it includes talking about the excessive taxes and charges, which we've spoken about, and a call for states to work, particularly with the African Union, to align policies and principles across the continent. And I think that was a discussion point during the webinar. Addressing the high cost of financing for African aviation, improving access to more competitive and affordable financing for African airlines and aviation organizations, and call for all operators, airlines, airports, air navigation service providers to critically look at their cost structures. In respect of air transport affordability, the whole issue of saving costs is actually as critical to find ways to make the air travel more affordable, to ensure that we get cost reduction so we can actually cover the cost by maybe even reducing the fares to try and make it more affordable to the greater population. Other issues requiring attention also include maintaining the focus on improving safety performance and matching those levels which were great when we achieved them in the 2015 to 2018 levels, and also improving African connectivity, deriving the benefits of SATM and African Continental Free Trade Area, infrastructure development where required to meet demand, and further to encourage the cooperation between airlines and achieve common economies of scale through alliances and other business initiatives. So I think that I'm pleased to then launch it and present that for submission to the webinar and to the conference. And with that, I'll hand back to Rafael, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Chris, for the nice wrap up. There could have not been any better way to sum up the day's activities than the way you have just done it. Thank you so much also for presenting to us a communique. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we bring the curtains down on this webinar of today. Unfortunately, for those who have posted questions, we cannot take them live, but rest assured, the various speakers who you have posted the questions to will reach out to you with the answers directly. Let me also inform the general public and those listening that we would share the presentations after we have secured the approval of those who put them together, who presented to us today. And we would also share the link to the recording where you can access it going forward. On behalf of the coordinator of AAIG, on behalf of all the members of AAIG and its partners, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and you have a nice day. Bye-bye.